Hey there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. The other day I went to Acadia National Park over at Schoodic Point in Winter Harbor and took some photos. I also did some painting on location, but I wanted to take one of the photos and do a painting of it back in the studio. And today we are going to use gouache and we are going to paint on a watercolor cotton block, a very affordable one that you can find at Meeden or on Amazon. And I will have a link and a coupon code in the video description if you want to pick one up yourself. I'm going to start off by sketching with a pencil, and I am drawing a little bit darker than you probably would, but I wanted to make sure it would show up on camera. And if you would like a real-time version of this tutorial, you can find it up now in Critique Club for $5 a month. You have access to over 100 real-time mixed media art tutorials. So no matter what kind of art you're into, 2D art that is, you will find tutorials that support it, as well as monthly creative prompts and the ability to upload your artwork for feedback from me for just $5 a month. So check that out if you are interested. If not, just sit back and relax and enjoy the tutorial here, or the time lapse. So I'm starting off with a thin layer of gouache, meaning I'm adding water to it to thin it down, kind of like watercolor. And I'm using a variety of brands here. I've got some Daniel Smith, I've got some M. Graham, I've got some Holbein, and I find they all work very well together. And honestly, they're all very similar in quality. So I would say if you're going with any artist quality brand of gouache, you're probably going to be all set with a decent product. My pick for the best mixing set to buy, if you just want to stick with a small amount of colors, would be the Holbein mixing set of 5 available on Amazon. I also like the Daniel Smith mixing set of 4 that's available on Blick, and I find that if you put those two sets together, you actually get a split primary system, which is really nice. But you know, if you have M. Graham, they're great. I haven't tried Winsor & Newton, but I've heard those are very good too. But even student grade gouache can be wonderful to work with. So I would say if you have some, use it first and then add to it as you feel like you're lacking. I like how the clouds came out, but I felt like they needed a little bit more shadow, so I am mixing up kind of like a desaturated purple to do some of the shadows. Now I am relying on my memory a lot for the color cues here because I was just there a day before I painted this, and I did that in conjunction with my reference photo that I took that you can see on the screen there. So I think that's a really something that's important about painting in plein air when you go out and you bring, even if it's just a little I had a little watercolor sketchbook and a little set of watercolors. I feel like it helps you remember the colors, the textures, the sights, the smells. It helps you get a better feel for the area that you're going to paint back in the studio. So it's fun. It's fun. It'll really help you remember your travels more if you do some painting on location. And I try to do quite a bit of that when the weather's good because the winters are long here in Maine. So when you get a chance to get out and paint somewhere, I think it's wonderful. And I encourage you to give it a try too. The brushes that I've been using so far have been watercolor brushes, and that's because I've been really thinning down the paints. And I've been using a 1-inch wash, and I've been using this 1/2-inch angular. And they are both Taklon brushes, golden Taklon brushes. And I will be switching to some Zen All-Media Taklon brushes. They're just a little bit firmer than my watercolor Taklons, but they're essentially the same fibers. I like when I'm using the gouache in a more thicker state, I like to use a firmer brush just because it's going to help it push around the paper a little bit better. So I try to match the absorbency of my brush to the thickness and absorbency of my paint. So when I'm using watercolor or I'm thinning down my gouache like watercolor, I'm using a more absorbent brush, a softer brush. And as I'm going thicker, I am going to be moving more to the all media brushes. If you could only have one brush in your stash and you work with acrylics and watercolors and gouache, I would say go for like the Zen or Menta All Media brushes. They're going to kind of give you the most bang for your buck, and they're gonna work with all the media that you have. But if you like to seriously get into watercolor, I would have some softer synthetic squirrel brushes that you just use for watercolor. So and I mean, you don't have to spend a ton of money on those. The synthetic squirrels are awesome, very affordable, and there's a lot of different companies that make them. I will recommend some in the video description in case you're curious. But I find that with like brushes, it's kind of a journey, and you kind of pick ones up here and there along the way, and you build your collection as you see what you like to use the best, because we're all different people. When I'm using gouache, I love to use flats and filberts. You may prefer rounds. When I'm using watercolor, I prefer rounds and cat's tongues and like larger flats, so and larger brushes in general. So it's just you develop your style and you find what works best for you. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, somebody that has tremors might prefer a like a reservoir quill liner versus a regular liner because it's easier to hold a steady line. We all have our own preferences. So try an assortment, and then as you realize what you like, then go more on that. Now, as you can see, I'm building up some more opaque layers. So if you're wanting to do this in watercolor, you absolutely can. You may want to leave out the areas where you're going to have foliage unpainted, so that way you'll be able to fill in with the watercolor. But I will say that you don't even have to do that very much, because the only area where you have that more brighter green would be in the low ground cover that's kind of popping up between the rocks. The trees are almost black green, so you definitely can mix that really dark color with watercolor and layer over what you have underneath in watercolor. So yeah, definitely you could do this in watercolor. The sky, you just want to be lifting and out with water where you have the puffier clouds, or you could go ahead and grab your white watercolor if you wanted to. I mean, it's your life. You do what you want to do. I found the sky was really fun to paint with the gouache, and doing the white into the blue wet and wet, I thought that worked out really well. It really gave me that cumulus cloud puffiness and feel. And also that white paint helped slow down the shadow color and make it nice and gradually shady. So experiment with what you have. I definitely think any basic set of watercolors, you could achieve this, and use your white if you want more of a gouache effect. If you have gouache, absolutely use it. I don't think you have to go out and get too spendy. If you have a set of jelly gouache at home, that's going to be fine. In my opinion, gouache is one of those mediums where you can get a good quality gouache in a student grade format, and you can get an excellent quality gouache in an artist grade format, but the gap is not as big as, say, artist quality, professional quality watercolors and student grade watercolors. There's a huge chasm between those grades. There's a big chasm in acrylics. Oils to an extent. Generally companies don't come out with really awful cheap oils. It's just not worth it, I don't think. But with gouache, I find that it's very, the gap is quite small. And it might be because in a lot of countries, gouache is used a lot more frequently for students, and they make a better quality product. I feel like when we got a lot of influx of like the jelly gouache and other Chinese made gouaches, the quality really leveled up, because gouache is used so much in school in Asia, and they make so much of it because the populations are so high, and it's such a common product that the price is reasonable. They make it in such mass market amounts that the price is reasonable. So yeah, I mean, Holbein gouache, $25 for 5 large tubes of it on Amazon. It's super high quality and it's wonderful. And I think it's just because they sell so much of it. And yeah, and it's nice because you don't have to spend a lot to get into it. It's easy on your brushes. You don't have to buy special brushes. You can use your acrylic or your watercolor brushes on it. It's just a really wonderful medium. And it's a fairly fast medium. This painting took, I would say, probably under an hour for a 7-inch by 10-inch painting, which for me is pretty good these days. Sometimes I feel like I'm getting slower at painting as I get older. I don't know. And also, I don't use gouache as often as I do other medias, but it was a lot of fun and it went together quite well. And I would highly encourage you to give it a try, or even just grab some white gouache and add it to your watercolors and see how you like it. And then, I mean, obviously you can get more opaque saturated colors if you do buy gouache, but if you're just thinking, I just want to see what I think about this, then you can totally DIY your own gouache and see what you think before spending. And then maybe buy a mixing set so you can have those really strong opaque primaries and you can use them with your watercolors. I mean, I love products you can use together. I love mixed media. That's one of the reasons I started the Critique Club, because I know so many people love mixed media and want to try a lot of things and want to have a variety of high quality tutorials, so they can get a buffet, an art supply buffet basically is what Critique Club is. And it's worked out really well for the members. So if it's something you're interested in, check it out. If not, that's fine too. I'm adding some little brighter, more opaque, lighter highlights to kind of give a little bit of energy into the scene, because I felt it was getting kind of dark and dead feeling with all the rocks. You know, I feel like it needed a little bit more springy green life in there. And I'm just kind of like puttering around. Sometimes it's hard to tell what your colors are going to look like until they dry, especially if you have really wet color like that. That green was really wet, so I dried my paper, and then I went in with some darker shadows at the bottom of those springy leaves just to anchor them in a little bit and make it look a little bit more realistic or believable. And then I added some more darker shadows in the pine trees that are kind of framing the scene, and that's pretty much it. I had a lot of fun with this painting, and I hope that you do too. It's an easy one. It's a great way to have a quick win for the start of your painting day, especially if you're a little rusty, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Please give me a thumbs up before you go. Until next time, happy crafting.